I want to talk about the power of corporate culture. For several years, the American actor Matthew McConaughey has referred to himself as the Minister of Culture of the University of Texas Athletics. Sports fans are used to seeing McConaughey on the sidelines at UT football games, sometimes even in the huddle, and on the front row of the UT basketball games. On a recent Joe Rogan Experience podcast that I don't listen to very often, McConaughey referred to himself as the Minister of Culture, not only for the UT Athletics, but for the whole city of Austin, Texas. I have no idea if the Minister of Culture title was given by University of Texas and the city of Austin, or if it was taken by McConaughey for himself. While it might never be clear if the title is serious or tongue-in-cheek, what is clear is that the actions of celebrity superfans like McConaughey, like Spike Lee with the New York Knicks and Drake with the Toronto Raptors and Mark Wahlberg with the Boston Red Sox and other official or unofficial ministers of culture, it is clear that they in some way contribute to the culture that surrounds the sports teams they support. The parallel to creating and cultivating ministry culture is obvious. If unathletic random celebrities can contribute to a sport team culture, then fully engaged God-anointed spiritual leaders have an even greater potential to shape and strengthen healthy culture in the organizations they lead. Ministry consultant William Vanderbloemen says, culture trumps your business idea. Culture trumps your strategy. Culture even trumps the competency of your team. Culture wins. It wins every time. If you have a bad culture, it will win and ruin your company. And if you have a great culture, it also will win and enable you to do great things. Culture not only wins, it has been said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It has also been said that culture eats strategy for lunch. Apparently, no one is exactly sure what culture eats for dinner, but it's probably had enough strategy by dinner time, so maybe it eats like a salad or something. Culture not only eats strategy, many books state that culture beats strategy. So we know what culture eats, but how does it work? Particularly, how does it work in a ministry context? To understand corporate culture, we must start with a contradiction. Here it is. Culture is communal and personal. I know these two words seem like mutually exclusive opposite concepts, but let me try to explain. Communal means that culture must exist within a group of people. If the cultural value is only in one person, it's an individual preference. It's not corporate culture. The beliefs and actions of one person, no matter how strong, cannot and will not and do not define or create corporate culture. On the other hand, culture is personal, meaning that it must be transferred from the group to the individual, from the mission statement on the wall to the hearts and affections of individual and real people. Unless enough individuals actually believe the beliefs and consistently do the behaviors, we will simply not have corporate culture. Ideas that are confined to statements and policies and missions and visions, but never get in the hearts and souls of people, they just simply never become culture. So how do we cultivate healthy culture so that it gets in the hearts and souls of the people and the organizations we lead? Cultivation is an agricultural word. It has to do with soils and seeds and eventually with the plants that grow from the seeds in the soil. Psalm 92 describes the fruit of cultivation, mentioning specifically the palm tree and the cedar tree. Let's look at the cedar tree for a minute. Verse 12 says, the righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. The next verse describes cultivation with the phrase, they are planted in the house of the Lord. The result is, as the psalmist says, they still bear fruit in old age. That's the dream, that no matter how old we get, our culture is such that fruit is still happening. So here in Psalm 92, we have a plant, and it's planted and it bears fruit. But this is not really about a plant. It's about people and communities. Specifically, it's about righteous people and righteous communities. Verse 12 teaches that not only do the righteous flourish like a palm tree, but they also grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Cedars are so associated with Lebanon that a single green cedar tree sits in the middle of their national flag. These cedars can grow as tall as a 5-story building. But when Scripture says cedars in Lebanon, it's not referring to a lone, tall cedar tree like the one pictured on the flag. Cedars in Lebanon is a forest of cedar trees. Cedars grow best in community, kind of like spiritual leaders. We do better in community. And healthy culture is best cultivated in community, not as individuals. The Cedars of Lebanon State Park is about 25 miles or 40 kilometers from Nashville. It covers 9,400 acres, that's almost 4,000 hectares. Approximately 10% of this massive state park, or 900 acres, almost 400 hectares, is called the Cedars of Lebanon Forest, which includes a unique type of growth called cedar glades. For some reason, these cedar glades are able to flourish despite the thin and sometimes non-existent soil that sits on top of the limestone. When the first Euro-American pioneers settled in the area, the cedar forest reminded them of the cedars of Lebanon that they had read about in the Bible, and that's why they named it the Cedars of Lebanon. And there's a town near Nashville called Lebanon, Tennessee. Like in biblical Lebanon, the Cedars of Lebanon State Park and the Cedars of Lebanon Forest right here in Tennessee consist of a community of cedar trees, not individual trees. If the righteous are to grow like a cedar in Lebanon, it can only happen in community. Healthy culture is the result of a forest of cedars, a community of leaders, not a single super tree. We cultivate healthy culture as a team, not as an individual. It's possible and common for leaders to build relatively healthy culture and have absolutely no idea how it happened. While there are a million little things that contribute to and take away from healthy culture, I've discovered 3 core practices that create and cultivate healthy culture. No matter how long we've led or what we lead, these 3 practices are non-negotiable if we want a healthy culture in our organizations. Number 1, obsessive focus. I grew up in a family of photographers. As a high school graduation gift, my dad gave me a Nikon FM. In my biased opinion, the best single lens reflex camera ever made. The FM's manual focus and manual exposure control forced the photographer to actually learn how to compose good photographs. If I didn't take time to manually focus the lens and manually adjust the exposure, my photos would have been a blurry mess. When it comes to ministry cultural values, we either have focus or a blurry mess of confusion. There's no third option. Healthy culture is not built by leaders who frenetically bounce from idea to idea, but by leaders who know how to focus. Constant change is the enemy of healthy culture. Strong culture is built by obsessive focus. Number 2, unapologetic repetition. Maybe I should say that again. Number 2, unapologetic repetition. In Psalm 136, the phrase, His steadfast love endures forever is repeated 27 times in 26 verses. That makes it almost impossible to miss the point of that psalm. The word immediately appears 59 times in the ESV Bible, the whole Bible. 43 of the 59 are in Mark's gospel. To make sure we feel the urgency of his gospel, Mark repeats immediately 11 times in the first chapter. So immediately is part of the point Mark is making. Paul unapologetically said that to write the same things to you is no trouble to me. Repetition was not a problem for Paul. In fact, he repeated the Greek word for joy or rejoice 16 times in his relatively brief letter to the Philippians. Now remember, Paul was writing Philippians from the least joyful place imaginable, a dark, dirty, dangerous Roman prison. Paul used repetition coming out of an unjoyful context to reinforce the possibility of joy, no matter the circumstances. Wise leaders follow the example set by the psalmist, by Mark, by Paul, and they unapologetically repeat important words and concepts over and over and over and over. Then they repeat them again. That's how healthy culture is cultivated. And finally, number 3, intentional staffing. Never forget that as spiritual leaders leading churches and ministry organizations, ultimately we're leading people. In the book Good to Great, Jim Collins addressed the importance of intentional staffing with his phrase, "Get the right people on the bus." Collins argued that great organizations start with the right people in the right seats. How much more important are the right people for a ministry? When we have the right people on the bus in the right place, then right strategies and right tactics are relatively simple to create. In other words, first who, then what? Because the right people cultivate healthy culture. The wrong people kill culture. Jesus modeled the principle of intentional staffing when he picked his original 12 disciples. Luke says it like this: "In these days he went out to the mountain to pray. All night he continued in prayer to God, and when day came, he called his disciples and chose from them 12 whom he named apostles." In ministry, intentional staffing is a spiritual exercise. It starts with prayer in order to discern God's will. Leadership development and leadership multiplication starts with the future leader's habits and hearts. Once we find potential leaders who have good spiritual habits that form and maintain upright hearts, then we begin to upgrade the 3 core leadership skills: vision casting, critical thinking, and culture building. That last skill, culture building, is the most important by far. Not only because culture eats strategy for breakfast and sometimes for lunch, but also because culture, not vision or strategy, is the most powerful factor in any organization. No matter how compelling our history, mission, vision, or strategy, if we don't find leaders who know how to build healthy culture through obsessive focus, unapologetic repetition, and intentional staffing, our ministry simply will not continue in strength and health. By the grace of God, may your ministry flourish like the palm tree and grow like cedars in Lebanon as you and your team obsessively cultivate healthy culture.